Gina, you said that you wanted to start working on this problem in the cafeteria. So why don't we get going with it, all right?
Okay.
Great. I think you've been making good progress with your breathing and some of the other techniques that you've been working on. So
that's been helpful.
This is an opportunity now for us to think about how we're going to get organized to get to a point where you can be more comfortable in managing things like going into the cafeteria.
Okay.
Hopefully, if you can master some things about that, then that'll help you with the driving and some of the other fears that you have.
All right.
So why don't we just try to recap for a moment what the problem is in going into the cafeteria. Can you tell me about that?
Sure. One problem is that it's usually really crowded at meal times, and so I get really frightened that I'll either be stuck there or I can't get out. They don't make sense, I know that. The other fear is that I might drop my tray and everybody would see it, or that I won't be able to find the people I'm meeting for lunch and I'll be lost.
Okay. And then what's the worst fear?
That I'm going to faint or have a heart attack and fall in the middle of the cafeteria and everybody see that. Or I could die.
Wow. So we could have a dead Gina in the middle of the cafeteria. Okay. Well, that's taken the anxiety to a pretty
the extreme.
Yeah. Okay. And when you think about going into the cafeteria, let's say it's an average day and you're thinking about going down there to lunch, what do you think the likelihood is of some of these things happening?
Well, I know that dying's probably not very likely, but the fear's still there. Getting lost or separated from my friends is possible because it is so crowded. I might not find them, or maybe they'll just leave without me. Dropping my tray is possible, but I've never done it before, but it's still a fear.
Okay. Why don't we take just one or two of those and just check them out to see how realistic the fear is. Is that okay? So out of those fears, which one would you like to try to work on?
Maybe dropping the tray.
Dropping the tray. Okay. Now, I think we've done some of this before. We've examined the evidence. Do you remember that technique where we actually write down the evidence that supports the idea and the evidence that is on the other side that's against it?
Sure.
So could we do that? Good. So you have actually a pencil and paper there. Would you be able to write it down? Great. So we're going to take this fear that you're going to drop your tray and make a fool out of yourself or something like that?
Right. Everybody would turn around and stare at me, and I'd be so embarrassed.
Yeah. So which one do you want to start with, the evidence for or the evidence against?
For.
Okay. So what do you have on that side of the balance sheet?
Well, I do feel clumsy or like a klutz. Sometimes I drop things. So.
Well, go ahead and put that down, then we'll check that out later.
Okay.
Any other evidence for the idea that you would drop your tray?
I do have the panic symptoms when I'm in the cafeteria, so that seems to make it more likely.
Okay. We'll put down all your ideas here.
Okay. Panic and nervous.
And then we'll step back from this and take a look at all these.
Okay.
Okay. Anything else?
Evidence for. I've seen other people make messes down there, and everybody turns around and looks at the noise.
Okay. So it happens occasionally.
Okay.
Is that it, or do you think of some other evidence?
That might be it.
Is that it? Okay. Good. So how about now on the other side of the balance sheet? What do you see there?
Well, I've never dropped it before. So I guess that's evidence against.
Right. And how many times have you had lunch and been in a cafeteria or a restaurant or anything like that?
Hundreds.
Hundreds. So how old are you now?
45.
45. So how many lunches do you think you've had in your life since you've been a kid and you've been in the cafeteria at school? And
oh, my goodness. I don't know. I never counted.
I guess they're like 365 days a year. And how many of those are you in a restaurant or a cafeteria or someplace away from home?
Maybe 200 days out of the year.
At least, okay. And how long have you been eating in a cafeteria or some other place?
Since I was 5.
Since you were 5.
So 40 years.
Okay, 40 years times 40 times 200. How many do we get now?
Oh, let's see. 40 times 200 would be 80,000.
Okay.
That's a lot.
All right. Well, I'm not sure we have to get the entire number there, but it's a lot.
Yes.
And it's not happened yet.
No.
Okay. So what do you think the likelihood is that you will drop a tray or do something like that in a cafeteria?
Maybe 5% that I might.
5%. It's interesting that you said that when you've ranked up now
I know.
All these thousands of times when you've not dropped the tray. It's still 5%.
But I feel more nervous now.
Yeah. You know, people with anxiety disorders tend to predict that things are going to happen at a much greater likelihood than is actually true.
I always think of the disaster or catastrophe.
Yeah, right. You know, we think about elevators, for example, as one of your other phobias. And for that, you have a very high, you have a prediction in your mind that's a very likely thing to occur, when actually it's probably pretty unlikely. And if we look at the track record, it's pretty unlikely.
True.
Let's take another way. Let's say if we looked at all the people that come through the cafeteria at your place of work every day. Now, how many people do you think eat lunch there?
Oh, 1,000.
1,000, okay. And in a year, how many times do you think people actually drop their tray down there?
I don't know.
Well, I don't know either. I mean,
Once a month, once a week, I don't know.
How many times I've seen people drop their tray. It occasionally happens.
Right.
And it's a little bit embarrassing when it happens, but let's say that it happens once a week or twice a week, and there are 10,000 people that come to the cafeteria. We're still looking at something that occurs, what, 1 in
10,000?
1 in 10,000, 1 in 5,000. So you're saying 5%. So what do you think about that?
It's not realistic.
Okay, so maybe you're overestimating it.
Yes.
Okay, so let's take a look and see if there's any other evidence against the idea that you would drop your tray.
I guess if I'm careful about where I place things on the tray so that it's balanced.
Okay. All right. Anything else?
I'm not sure.
Okay. Well, I'm wondering, do you have control of your arms and your legs and your hands and so forth that
I
you
do.
can grab onto a tray?
I do.
Okay.
So I can walk and hold things.
Okay, so you have the capacity to hold the tray solidly, don't you? Right.
I do.
Just one other thing I can think of, and that's we've been working on this breathing training, which can help you break a panic attack. And I'm wondering if in any way that helps you with evidence against, if you started to have this fast breathing, that you could get control over it by the way that you're managing your breathing and the imagery that's in your mind.
I hadn't thought of that.
That gives you a control mechanism now for this.
Okay.
Is that okay to put that down?
Sure.
Great. All right. So now we look at all this evidence for and against. What do you think the true likelihood is that you would drop your tray?
Pretty slim.
All right. 1 in what?
10,000.
Okay. So let's say that's
Instead
1 in
of
10,000.
5%.
Now, it's possible that 1 in 10,000 actually does occur. So
Sure.
maybe it does occur. So then what?
I would want to die.
You would want to die?
I would be so embarrassed.
Okay. All right.
Everybody would turn around to see what idiot had done that.
Okay. Now, remember I told you that people that have anxiety tend to have a prediction that bad things are going to happen that is much greater than is really the facts.
Right.
They also tend to predict that they have a decreased ability to cope with those things. They can't manage them. Now, what I'm wondering is whether that prediction is accurate, whether indeed you couldn't cope with this. Let's say that you did drop your tray. In fact, I might even construct an experiment where you went down to the cafeteria and you dropped your tray on purpose.
Oh, no.
Yeah, well, why not, you know? So what? You know, what happens if you drop your tray?
Food would splash everywhere. The
Yeah,
dishes
right.
would break.
Right,
People would
okay.
turn around and look at me.
All right, and then what?
I'd have a mess to clean up.
Yeah, and then what would happen?
I'd have to run out of the cafeteria and go back to the office.
Well, we could come back to that one and see whether you really need to do that. But what would the other people do with their lives then?
They'd look and laugh.
They would. Would they say, look at Gina, what a fool, what a fool?
They might.
Would they think about that all day long and laugh about her all behind their backs?
No.
I don't think so.
No, they'd go on back to
they
their
have their own
lunch.
things to do, don't they?
Yeah.
So it could be that you're building up in your own mind the consequences of this that are much greater than are actually the case. So maybe for homework what you could do is to write down what actually would happen if you dropped the tray.
Okay.
And then to think about how you could cope. You know, sometimes we've done these things called coping cards where you write down certain things you're going to do to cope with it. So I want you to imagine in your mind that you actually drop the tray and then to develop a coping strategy for how you manage it.
Okay.
Like, you know, you just said that you'd have to clean it up. Or you get to go get somebody to help you clean it up or whatever.
Yeah.
Okay?
Okay.
So think about a positive coping strategy, and then we'll come back next week and talk some more about that and figure out how to do this.
I can do that.
Now, what do you think about the idea of dropping your tray on purpose in the cafeteria?
I don't think I want to do that
You're
yet.
not quite ready for that?
No.
Well, you never know. It might be something that, you know, to challenge yourself, to sometimes take yourself a bit over the top, can really help you get full control over these anxiety problems. I've seen that in many people. If they're afraid of something, if they can just go beyond a little bit, then they can really feel like they can handle it and master it. But we'll come back to that another day.
Okay.